There are three things that are going on now, the three most important things that are going on to great extremes that have not existed since the 1930 to 45 period. Okay. And it's important to know those three things and then to understand them well.
Okay.
The first is what is going on with money and credit when you get to something like a zero interest rate, and you need buying power. The government needs buying power, but they can't tax it, and they can't. So what we have is the production of a lot of debt that the central bank prints money and buys that debt to spend. And the last time that happened, in the last few years, it happened starting in 2008, interest rates hit zero. They couldn't lower their interest rates. So they had to print a lot of debt, and the government went in and bought it. Okay. And we're coming to the end of a debt cycle. Okay. So this is a big thing, because where does the money come from and who will get what? The government will now determine that, and then they'll print it and it'll devalue money. Okay, and how money flows, a big deal. So that's number one. The second one are wealth and political gaps that are causing great conflicts. Throughout history, there's always been, the main things that everybody's always fought over is money and power, particularly political power. So what we have is a situation when you have a large wealth gap and you have an economic downturn, particularly if you put a lot of debt having at the same time, you have a fight. I mean, that's been true through history. And it's reflected in the political gap. So the political gap is, it's classic political gap, left, right, okay, capitalist, socialist. How do you distribute it? How are you going to deal with that? That becomes the other, and how you fight. So that's the second of the two. This wealth political gap that's causing the conflict, and it's coming at a time where we don't have much money because we don't have a good financial position. We're printing and putting it out. So
we're still paying off debts still, right?
Yeah, but with made up money. I mean, meaning what happened, like COVID was such a good example. Okay, you have COVID, and a lot of people and companies had falls in their income that would be ruinous. Okay, if checks didn't go out, we would have had a revolution.
Right.
And so those checks, and how do you save everything and so on? Okay, so, and it's not like the government had real money. Like they didn't have any money. They already owe a lot.
So they just printed more money to give to people.
So they made more debt, and then the government and the Federal Reserve printed it, and the checks went out, which diminishes the value of money and so on and changes things. Yeah. So then the third thing is the rise of a great power to challenge an existing great power. So the rise of China to challenge the United States. In all history, there are world orders. What that means are they're the dominant power. It's like in nature almost, the big bull or something. Anyway, there's the dominant power. And then what happens is in 1945, we entered the American world order. The United States won the war, and it ended. And then in 1945, the winners of the world carved up the world. We had 80% of what was considered money at the time, gold. 80% of the world's money, essentially. We counted for half the world's economy. And the rules were set in the United States, basically. That's why the United Nations is in New York, the World Bank and the IMF are in Washington, D.C., because we began the American century. Okay, and then we are now at a time, we've never had another power challenge us in the same way. There was the Soviet Union, but they were always a fraction of the size economically, so couldn't compete on that same basis. They had nuclear weapons, but they didn't have the economic power and so on. But now we're dealing with China coming on as a power. I spent a lot of time in China over the last 36 years, by the way, and I admire how they're doing a lot of things.
Right.
I mean, I know it's controversial to say that, but in terms of like, they're a power.
Yeah.
Whoa! Like since
Big
I started going there, their average income has increased by 30 times. You know, so they're a comparable power, and they're also growing faster, and so that has an effect. So those three things are things that never happened in my lifetime before, but happened before in history, which led me to do the studies of what happened in history and the lessons I could gain. Well, I want to distinguish, there's big differences in opportunities.
Yes.
So let's say, supposing you have two people of comparable opportunities.
Yes.
And then they were going to do that.
Yep.
Okay. The marshmallow test, as you know, apparently, is you take a kid and you say, okay, you can have one marshmallow now, or you could have two marshmallows in 15 minutes or
if you don't eat the first one. Yeah.
If you don't eat the first one, right?
Yep.
Okay. Once you start to realize that deferred gratification is going to make you better and so on, and you start to count and you say, like something like, how many days, weeks, months, or years can I live if I don't have money come in? And you start to focus in on that. That's the first step, okay? Like the marshmallow test, okay? So I want to save. You got to start there. Then if you do that, you're necessarily going to go save in what? And then you'll start to get exposure to how these things are different. Okay, then you start to care. Well, I can have one of these and one of those, and you start to experience, and then you start to learn. Well, I think first you start with what are the most important things that you're closest to, like, is it your business? First, calculate how many days, weeks, months, or years you can live on your saving. Because when you do that, you'll gain security. You'll gain that, okay? So look at how much you're spending, okay? And then say, how much do I need? And whatever that number is, you're going to need more than that, because it may go down rather than go up. So, okay, now do I have a year's spending? Okay, so I think you start there. Then you start to think, what are the things that are most important for me? Like, and then you start with your business,